The late afternoon sun painted the Arizona horizon in shades of orange and crimson, but Jake Morrison could no longer find beauty in anything. His worn leather boots kicked up dust on the cracked earth as he led his horse, Thunder, down a trail that seemed to lead nowhere, much like his life for the past 3 years. The hot wind carried the scent of sage and dry earth, whispering through the cacti and red rocks that rose like silent sentinels across the desert landscape. Jake pulled the brim of his weathered hat lower to shield his eyes from the relentless sun, but nothing could protect him from the storm raging inside his chest. 3 years, Sarah, he murmured to the wind, as he did every evening when the loneliness became unbearable. 3 years since you left, and I still can't— His voice cracked, swallowed by the vast silence of the plains. Thunder snorted softly, as if sensing his owner's anguish, and Jake ran a trembling hand through the animal's mane, the only companion he had left in this cruel world. Jake was 42 years old, but he felt like a man of 80. His brown hair now showed silver threads at the temples, and the lines around his blue eyes told stories of pain he'd rather forget. His body was still strong from years of working cattle, but his soul was shattered, fragmented like glass, trampled underfoot. He remembered that cursed day perfectly. Sarah had been 7 months pregnant when the fever took her. The doctors from the nearest town couldn't do anything. They arrived too late, they said. Jake held her hand as life drained from her green eyes, promising he'd take care of their baby. But the baby went with her, leaving Jake alone with an emptiness that seemed to grow larger each day. I tried to keep going, he said, his rough voice cutting through the silence. Tried to be the man you wanted me to be, but I can't anymore, Sarah, I just can't. The ranch they'd built together now stood abandoned, overrun by weeds and sorrow. Jake had sold the cattle and horses, keeping only Thunder and some savings that would soon run out. He'd wandered from town to town, taking temporary work, but nothing could fill the hole in his heart. That afternoon, as he rode through the arid lands near the small town of Red Rock, Jake felt the weight of the revolver on his gun belt differently. For weeks, the idea had grown in his mind like poisonous weeds. Maybe it was time to find Sarah on the other side. The sky began to darken, painting the clouds purple and gold. Jake dismounted near a small creek that cut through the landscape, offering one of the few water sources in the region. Thunder drank eagerly while Jake knelt by the bank, contemplating his reflection in the crystal-clear water. "What would you do in my place?" he asked the distorted image of his face. But Sarah wasn't there to answer, as she hadn't been for 3 long years. He removed his hat and ran his hands through his hair, feeling the weight of the decision he'd made. Tomorrow would be the anniversary of Sarah's death. It seemed fitting that it should also be the day he stopped suffering. The evening wind began to blow stronger, carrying the scent of distant rain. Jake made a small camp near a rock formation that offered some protection. He lit a campfire with mechanical movements, practiced from years of solitary life on the trails. As the flames danced and crackled, he pulled a yellowed, worn photograph from his shirt pocket. Sarah smiled at him, wearing the blue dress she loved so much, standing on the porch of the house they'd built together. His fingers gently traced the outline of her face in the photo. "Remember when you said I was the strongest man you knew?" he whispered to the image. "You were wrong, my love. Without you, I'm nothing." The tears he'd held back all day finally began to fall, creating small dark spots on the photograph. Jake wept as he hadn't wept in months, letting all the pain and despair flow freely under the protective cloak of night. Thunder approached and nuzzled Jake's shoulder, offering the only comfort he could. Jake hugged the horse's neck, feeling the animal's warmth and life contrasting with the cold that had settled in his heart. "You'll be fine, boy," he murmured to Thunder. "Tomorrow I'll leave you in town. Someone will take care of you." The moon rose full and silver, bathing the landscape in ghostly light. Jake put away the photograph and lay down on the hard ground, using his saddle as a pillow. The starry sky stretched infinitely above him, reminding him of past nights when he and Sarah would lie on the grass at home, planning their future and dreaming of the children they would have. Now, that same sky seemed like a vast, empty darkness, perfectly reflecting the state of his soul. Jake closed his eyes, knowing it would be one of the last times he'd see the stars. Tomorrow, when the sun rose, he would do what he should have done long ago. The fire gradually died down to weak embers, and the desert silence enveloped Jake like a shroud. In his dreams, he could hear Sarah's laughter echoing on the wind, but always too distant to reach. When dawn broke over the red rocks, Jake woke with a heaviness in his chest that had nothing to do with the hard ground. Today was the day, the anniversary of losing everything that mattered, the day he would finally find peace. He packed his meager belongings slowly, each movement deliberate and final. Thunder seemed to sense something was different, staying close and nuzzling his owner more frequently than usual. Jake stroked the horse's neck one last time before mounting up. "Come on, boy," he said quietly. "Let's head to town." The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the promise of another scorching day. As they rode toward Red Rock, Jake felt a strange calm settling over him. The decision was made. The suffering would end. The dusty main street of Red Rock stretched before Jake like a final judgment. The small frontier town was waking up to another scorching day, with shopkeepers sweeping their porches and the blacksmith's hammer already ringing against hot metal. Jake rode Thunder slowly down the street, his hand unconsciously resting near his gun belt, feeling the weight of his decision with each hoofbeat. He'd planned to stable Thunder at Murphy's livery, maybe grab one last meal at the saloon, and then he'd find a quiet spot outside town where no one would have to clean up his mess. The thought should have brought him peace, but instead, his chest felt tight with an emotion he couldn't name. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured as Thunder shied away from a dog that barked at their passing. Even his horse seemed on edge today, as if sensing the finality in the air. Jake was about to dismount in front of the livery stable when he heard it, a sound that stopped him cold, crying. Not the loud wailing of a hurt child, but the quiet, desperate sobbing of someone who had learned that screaming brought no help. He looked around, following the sound until his eyes landed on a narrow alley between the general store and the barber shop. There, huddled against the wooden wall like a discarded bundle of rags, sat a small girl. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with tangled brown hair that caught the morning light, and clothes so dirty and torn they barely qualified as such. Jake felt something twist in his chest. He should keep riding. This wasn't his problem. Today was supposed to be about ending his pain, not taking on someone else's. But Thunder had already turned toward the alley, and Jake found himself dismounting before he'd made a conscious decision to do so. "Hey there, little one," he called softly, approaching slowly so as not to startle her. "You all right?" The girl looked up with eyes that were far too old for her young face, green eyes that reminded him painfully of Sarah's. Her cheeks were streaked with tears and dust, and her small hands clutched a dirty cloth doll that had seen better days. "I'm lost," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know where my mama and papa went." Jake's heart clenched. He knelt down a few feet away from her, removing his hat in a gesture of respect he'd learned from his own father years ago. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emma," she said, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Emma Fletcher. We were traveling with a wagon train, but they left without me when I went to pick flowers for Mama. I looked everywhere, but I can't find them." Jake knew what had happened. Wagon trains moved on schedule, and if a child wandered off, sometimes the cruel mathematics of survival meant leaving them behind. It was harsh, but it was the reality of frontier life. The fact that this little girl was sitting here alone meant her parents were probably days ahead by now if they'd even noticed she was missing. "How long have you been here, Emma?" he asked gently. 3 days, I think. Maybe 4. The nice lady at the store gave me some bread yesterday, but she said she can't keep feeding me." Emma's lower lip trembled. "I'm so hungry and I'm scared, and I just want my mama." Despite everything, his pain, his plans, his certainty that today would be his last, Jake felt something stir inside him that he'd thought was dead. Without thinking, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a piece of jerky and a canteen of water. "Here," he said, offering them to her. "Eat slow now. Don't want you getting sick." Emma took the food with shaking hands, her eyes wide with gratitude. As she ate, Jake studied her face, noting the hollow cheeks and the way her clothes hung loose on her small frame. She'd been on her own longer than 3 or 4 days, maybe weeks. "Thank you, mister," she said between small bites. "You're very kind. My mama always said to watch out for kind people, because they're getting rarer every day." Something about the way she said it, the exact phrasing, made Jake's blood run cold. Those were Sarah's words. Sarah used to say that exact thing when they'd encounter travelers on the road, when she'd insist on sharing their food or offering shelter for the night. "Your mama sounds like a wise woman," Jake managed, his voice rougher than he intended. Emma nodded solemnly. "She was the best mama in the whole world. She used to sing to me every night before bed, and she made the most beautiful dresses. She always smelled like lavender and sunshine. The little girl's face crumpled with fresh grief. I miss her so much it hurts in my chest. Jake knew that feeling all too well. What was your mama's name, Emma? The little girl looked up at him with those startling green eyes, and for a moment, Jake forgot how to breathe. There was something familiar about her features, something that tugged at memories he'd tried to bury. Her name was Sarah, Emma whispered, so quietly that Jake almost thought he'd imagined it. Sarah Fletcher. She was the most beautiful lady in the whole world, and she loved me more than all the stars in the sky. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Jake's hands began to shake, and he had to grab onto Thunder's reins to steady himself. It couldn't be possible. It was just a coincidence. Sarah was a common enough name. But those eyes, that phrasing, the way she tilted her head when she spoke. Sarah, he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Emma nodded, seeming not to notice Jake's distress. Sometimes, when I'm really scared, I pretend she's still with me. I pretend I can hear her voice telling me everything's going to be all right. She used to say that when the storms came, and she was always right. Jake's mind raced. His Sarah had died 3 years ago, pregnant with their child. But what if somehow... No, that was impossible. He'd held her hand as she died. He'd buried her with his own hands in the little cemetery behind their ranch. But this child, with her green eyes and her way of speaking, with her mama named Sarah who said the same things his Sarah used to say, it was too much to be mere coincidence. Emma, he said slowly, trying to keep his voice steady, can you tell me more about your mama? What did she look like? The little girl's face brightened at the chance to talk about her mother. She had the prettiest golden hair, like sunshine, and green eyes just like mine. She was tall and graceful, and when she laughed it sounded like music. She used to tell me stories about a man she loved once, before I was born. A cowboy with kind blue eyes who made her feel safe. Jake's world collapsed around him. Golden hair, green eyes, stories about a cowboy with blue eyes. It couldn't be true, but the details were too specific, too perfect. Somehow, impossibly, this child knew about Sarah. His Sarah. Emma, he whispered, his voice breaking. Where is your mama now? What happened to her? The little girl's face fell, and fresh tears began to stream down her cheeks. She got sick last winter. Real sick. Before she went to heaven, she made me promise to find the cowboy from her stories. She said his name was Jake, and that he would take care of me if something happened to her. She said he lived in a place called Arizona, near the Red Rocks. Jake Morrison felt as if he'd been struck by lightning. His knees gave out and he sank to the ground beside the little girl, staring at her in shock and disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Sarah was dead. He'd watched her die. But this child... She told you to find Jake, he managed. Emma nodded, clutching her doll tighter. She said he was the best man she ever knew, and that he would love me because I was part of her. But I don't know how to find him, and I'm so scared and tired and hungry. With trembling hands, Jake reached out and gently touched Emma's face, seeing Sarah in every feature, hearing her voice in every word the child spoke. Emma, he whispered, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. My name is Jake Morrison. And I think your mama sent you to me. Jake Morrison sat on the dusty ground of that alley for what felt like hours, staring at the little girl who had just turned his world upside down. Emma Fletcher clutched her worn doll and looked back at him with those impossibly familiar green eyes, waiting for him to say something, anything, that would make sense of this moment. You're Jake, Emma whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and disbelief. The Jake from Mama's stories? Jake nodded slowly, his throat too tight to speak. His mind was reeling, trying to process what seemed impossible. This child, this precious little girl sitting before him, somehow knew about Sarah. Not just her name, but details that no stranger could know. The way Sarah laughed, her love of lavender, even her exact words about kind people becoming rare. Yes, sweetheart, he finally managed. I'm Jake, and I knew your mama. I knew Sarah very well. Emma's face lit up with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. Really? You really knew her? She always said you were out here somewhere, and that if I ever found you, you'd keep me safe. The weight of that trust hit Jake like a physical blow. Here was this orphaned child, alone and frightened, placing all her faith in a man who'd been ready to give up on life just hours before. A man who knew nothing about caring for children, who'd failed to protect even his own wife and unborn baby. But looking at Emma's hopeful face, Jake felt something shift inside his chest. The crushing despair that had been his constant companion for 3 years was still there, but it was no longer alone. Alongside it was something he'd thought he'd lost forever: purpose. "Come on, Emma," he said, getting to his feet and extending his hand to her. "Let's get you cleaned up and fed proper. We've got a lot to talk about." Emma took his hand without hesitation, her small fingers trustingly wrapping around his calloused ones. The gesture was so simple, yet it sent a jolt through Jake's heart. When was the last time another human being had reached for him with such faith? Jake led her to Murphy's livery stable first, arranging for Thunder to be fed and watered. Tom Murphy, the grizzled stable owner, raised an eyebrow at the sight of Jake with a child, but said nothing. In frontier towns, people learn not to ask too many questions about other folks' business. Next, Jake took Emma to the general store, where Mrs. Henderson, the same woman who'd given Emma bread, looked surprised to see the little girl with the mysterious cowboy who'd ridden into town that morning. "She needs clothes," Jake told the shopkeeper, his voice gruff with emotion. "Everything. Dress, shoes, undergarments, a coat for cold nights. The works." Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows shot up. "That's going to cost you quite a bit, Mr. Morrison, Jake Morrison, and I don't care what it costs." As Mrs. Henderson bustled around gathering clothes for Emma, Jake knelt down beside the little girl. "Emma, I need to ask you some questions about your mama. Important questions. Can you be brave and answer them for me?" Emma nodded solemnly. "I'll try, Mr. Jake. When was your mama born? Do you know?" Emma scrunched up her face in concentration. "She told me she was born in the summer when the sunflowers were blooming. She said she was 28 when I was born, and I'm 8 now, so that makes her 36. Jake finished quietly. His Sarah would have been 36 this year, if she'd lived. "Did your mama ever tell you about where she lived before you were born?" "She said she lived on a ranch with the cowboy she loved. She said they were going to have babies and grow old together, but something bad happened. She had to leave and she never saw him again. It made her sad sometimes, especially when she looked at the stars." Jake's hands began to shake. Sarah used to love looking at the stars. They'd spent countless nights lying on their backs in the grass, planning their future and dreaming of the children they'd have. But this was impossible. Sarah had died in his arms. He'd buried her himself. "Emma," he said carefully, "did your mama ever tell you what happened to the cowboy, why she had to leave?" The little girl's face grew serious. "She said there was sickness, and she got very ill. Everyone thought she was going to die, including the cowboy. But she got better except—" Emma paused, biting her lip. "Except what, sweetheart?" "Except she lost her memory. She couldn't remember anything for a long time, not even her own name. Some kind people found her and took care of her, but by the time she remembered who she was, months had passed. She tried to go back to the ranch, but it was empty. She never found the cowboy again." Jake felt the blood drain from his face. Memory loss from fever. It was rare, but it happened. Could it be possible that Sarah had survived, had lived, had been searching for him while he mourned her as dead? "Mr. Morrison?" Mrs. Henderson's voice cut through his thoughts. "I've got everything ready for the little one." Jake stood on unsteady legs, pulling out his money with shaking hands. As Mrs. Henderson wrapped the purchases, Jake tried to process what Emma had told him. If Sarah had lived, if she'd lost her memory and been unable to find him, it would explain so much. But it also meant he'd given up their ranch, their life, their future, all for nothing. After paying for the clothes, Jake took Emma to the town's small bathhouse behind the barber shop. While she cleaned up in privacy, he sat outside, his head in his hands, trying to make sense of everything. An hour later, Emma emerged transformed. Clean and dressed in a simple blue dress with her hair brushed and braided, she looked like any other frontier child. But those eyes, Sarah's eyes, continued to haunt him. "Do I look better, Mr. Jake?" she asked shyly. "You look beautiful, Emma, just like your mama." They went to the saloon for a meal, ignoring the curious stares of the other patrons. Emma ate with the careful manners of a child who'd been taught proper behavior, but also with the desperation of someone who'd gone too long without regular meals. "Emma," Jake said as she finished her second helping of stew, "I need you to think carefully. Did your mama ever mention my last name?" "Morrison." Emma nodded immediately. "She said Jake Morrison was the kindest man who ever lived." She said he had blue eyes like a summer sky and hands that were gentle even though they were strong. She said he made her feel safe, just by being in the same room. Each word was like a knife to Jake's heart. Those were things only his Sarah would know, intimate details of their relationship that no stranger could fabricate. "Where did you and your mama live, Emma?" "We had a little house in Kansas. Mama took in sewing and mending to earn money. She was real good at it. Sometimes she'd make pretty dresses for the ladies in town for special occasions." Emma's face brightened. "She taught me how to sew, too. I'm not very good yet, but she said I'd learn." Kansas. That was 2 states away from Arizona. If Sarah had been alive all this time, living in Kansas, no wonder he'd never found any trace of her. He'd searched every town within 100 miles of their old ranch, but he'd never gone that far. "Emma, when your mama got sick this last time, did she say anything else about me? About Jake?" The little girl's eyes filled with tears again. "She said she wished she could see you one more time, to tell you she was sorry for leaving. She said she loved you more than all the stars in the sky, and that she hoped you'd found happiness. She made me promise that if something happened to her, I'd try to find you and tell you she never stopped loving you." Jake closed his eyes, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was hearing. If this was true, if Sarah had been alive all these years, loving him, remembering him, hoping to see him again, then he'd wasted 3 years of his life, drowning in unnecessary grief. "Mr. Jake," Emma's small voice broke through his thoughts, "are you angry that I found you? Mama said you might have a new family now and you might not want me." Jake opened his eyes and looked at this brave little girl who'd somehow found her way to him across hundreds of miles of dangerous frontier. This child who might be the last connection he'd ever have to the woman he'd loved more than life itself. "No, Emma," he said firmly, reaching across the table to take her small hand. "I'm not angry. I'm grateful. More grateful than you could ever know." And for the first time in 3 years, Jake Morrison meant every word he said. The crushing weight of despair was still there, but it was changing, transforming into something else entirely. Purpose, hope, the possibility of healing. Whatever the truth about Sarah was, whatever impossible circumstances had brought this child to him, Jake knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would protect Emma Fletcher with his life. She was all he had left of the woman he'd loved, and he would not fail her the way he felt he'd failed Sarah. "What happens now, Mr. Jake?" Emma asked. Jake squeezed her hand gently. "Now, little one, we figure out what comes next. Together." 3 weeks had passed since Jake Morrison found Emma Fletcher in that dusty alley, and his world had changed in ways he never thought possible. They'd taken a room at Mrs. Caldwell's boarding house on the edge of Red Rock, and for the first time in years, Jake woke up each morning with a reason to get out of bed. Emma was still small for her age, but regular meals and safety had brought color back to her cheeks and light back to her green eyes. She followed Jake everywhere like a devoted shadow, helping him with small tasks and filling the silence that had been his companion for so long with her gentle chatter. This morning, as golden sunlight streamed through their small window, Jake watched Emma carefully fold the few belongings they'd accumulated. Today they were leaving Red Rock. Jake had made a decision that surprised even himself. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Jake?" Emma asked, holding her worn doll close. "Going back to your old ranch?" Jake knelt down to her level, his weathered hands gentle as he adjusted her hair ribbon. "I'm sure, sweetheart. It's time we went home." The decision hadn't been easy. For 3 years Jake had avoided that place, unable to bear the memories it held. But talking with Emma, hearing Sarah's story through her innocent words, had changed something fundamental inside him. The ranch wasn't just a monument to his grief anymore. It was the place where Sarah had been happiest. It was their home. "But what if it's all broken down?" Emma worried. "Then we'll fix it," Jake said simply. Together. They loaded their few possessions onto Thunder and the gentle mare Jake had bought for Emma to ride. As they prepared to leave Red Rock, several townspeople came to say goodbye. "Mrs." Henderson pressed a wrapped bundle of food into Emma's hands, and even gruff old Tom Murphy tipped his hat. "You take care of that little girl, Morrison," Murphy said gruffly. "She's brought something back to life in you." Jake nodded, understanding exactly what the old man meant. Emma hadn't just saved him from ending his life, she'd given him back his soul. The journey to the old ranch took 2 days of steady riding through familiar territory. Jake pointed out landmarks to Emma, sharing stories of his life with her mother that made the little girl's eyes shine with joy. Each mile they traveled, Jake felt lighter, as if he was shedding years of accumulated grief. When they finally crested the hill that overlooked the ranch, Jake's breath caught in his throat. The house still stood, weathered but solid. The corral fences needed mending, and weeds had taken over Sarah's garden, but it was still home. It was still the place where love had lived. "It's beautiful," Emma whispered, staring at the valley spread out before them. "I can see why Mama loved it here." Jake dismounted and helped Emma down, his hands shaking slightly as he approached the front porch. The door was unlocked. No one bothered stealing from abandoned places this far from town. Inside, everything was exactly as he'd left it, covered in dust but untouched by time. Emma wandered around the main room with wide eyes, taking in the stone fireplace, the handmade furniture, the faded curtains that Sarah had sewn with such care. "Mr. Jake," she said softly, "it feels like Mama's still here." Jake's throat tightened. "She is, Emma. She'll always be here." Over the following days, they worked together to bring the ranch back to life. Jake repaired the roof and fences, while Emma swept and cleaned with the determined efficiency of someone who'd learned to take care of herself too young. In the evenings, they sat by the fireplace, and Jake would tell Emma stories about her mother, about Sarah's laugh, her terrible cooking, the way she sang while she worked in the garden. "She would have loved you so much," Jake told Emma one night as they watched the stars from the front porch. "You have her spirit, her kindness. You're the best part of her, living on." Emma curled up against his side, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you think she can see us now? Do you think she knows I found you?" Jake looked up at the vast sky, at the same stars he and Sarah used to wish upon. "I think she does, sweetheart, and I think she's happy." As the weeks turned into months, the ranch came back to life around them. Jake bought a small herd of cattle and a few chickens. Emma planted a garden where Sarah's had once grown, her small hands carefully tending the vegetables with the same love her mother had shown. The transformation in Jake was remarkable. The man who had been ready to give up on life now woke each day with purpose. Emma needed him, not just for protection and provision, but for love and guidance. In caring for her, he'd found a way to honor Sarah's memory that didn't require drowning in grief. One evening, as they sat down to dinner at the table Jake had built with his own hands, Emma looked up at him with those familiar green eyes. "Mr. Jake?" she said quietly. "Would it be all right if I called you Papa?" Jake's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. The question hit him like a physical blow, but not of pain, of pure, overwhelming love. This brave little girl, who had lost everything and found her way to him through sheer faith and determination, wanted him to be her father. "Emma," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "there's nothing in this world that would make me happier." Emma's face lit up with joy. "Really? Even though I'm not really your daughter?" Jake reached across the table and took her small hands in his larger ones. "Emma Fletcher, you are my daughter in every way that matters. I promise to love you, protect you, and guide you for as long as I live. You've given me back my life, little one. You've made me remember what it means to hope." That night, as Jake tucked Emma into the bed he'd made for her in what would have been the nursery, she looked up at him with sleepy contentment. "Papa," she murmured. "Yes, sweetheart. I think Mama's stories were right. You really are the kindest man who ever lived." Jake kissed her forehead gently. "Sweet dreams, Emma. I love you. I love you too, Papa." As Jake stepped out onto the porch that night, he felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The crushing weight of grief was gone, replaced by something stronger: love, purpose, and hope for the future. He pulled out the worn photograph of Sarah that he still carried, but for the first time, looking at it didn't bring pain. Instead, he felt gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered to her image. "Thank you for sending her to me. Thank you for giving me the chance to love again." A gentle breeze stirred the air, carrying the scent of Emma's garden and the sound of cattle settling for the night. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate, and Jake smiled. The loner cowboy who had been ready to give up was gone forever. In his place stood a father, a protector, a man who had learned that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages. Jake Morrison had his family back, different than he'd dreamed, but perfect in its own way. And for the first time in 3 years, he was truly completely home.